I think you said that. Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. We're very excited for our panel today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we have a lot of questions for our panelists. But before we get into our questions, I'm going to kind of go over some just kind of background information about the purpose of this panel series. And so our kind of general topic today is public safety. And, we're going to start off by kind of talking about what that is, what that includes. And so this is kind of our agenda. So I'll share a little bit about the purpose of our ABA Beyond ASD series. We do have a pre and post test, and this is to just measure, kind of knowledge pre the panel, and then just to get some data, and then, knowledge after the panel. And then we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves and get into the questions, and hopefully by the end have some time for some Q&A for those of you who are joining us live. And we also have a graduate application fee raffle, which I'll speak a little bit more about. So to share a little bit about kind of why our series came into fruition, our purpose is to expose students at the undergraduate and graduate levels to the different applications of behavior analysis or behavior science. A lot of our our science is used with individuals with autism spectrum disorder and related developmental disabilities, which is great. But our science has so much more to offer. So that's kind of the purpose of our series and all the topics that we've been focusing on. And so we hope that through the series we introduce students to different leaders in the field and to the different subspecialties that they're working in. And so I'm Dr. Natalia Baires, and I'm also joined by my colleagues, Dr. Natalie Williams Awodeha and Dr. Lesley Shawler, who's not here with us today, but we kind of make up the team for this project. And so I think Dr. Williams Awodeha is going to put the links to these surveys in the chat. But we do have kind of a demographics, survey just to collect some demographics on who we're reaching, who's attending our panel discussions, and as well as the pre-test. So you can access the link in the chat, or you can use your phone to scan the QR code, and the links are being dropped in the chat right now. So I'll move to the next slide. So graduate application fee raffle. So since the purpose of this panel series is to reach students at undergraduate and graduate levels, we are having a raffle for to encourage students to pursue a degree in behavior analysis, behavior science. And so if you enter this raffle and you're selected, then we essentially pay for the fee for graduate application to any program within behavior analysis or behavior science. So if you are a student and are interested in pursuing graduate degree, then we welcome you to enter into our raffle, and the link will also be available in the chat. All right, so now that we've gotten kind of the housekeeping kind of boring things out of the way, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and they're going to kind of speak more about themselves. But today we have the honor of learning from Dr. Rasha Baruni, as well as Dr. Scott Geller. And I guess with that, we'll segue into the first question, which is to please share a bit about yourself. I don't know, Dr. Baruni, would you like to start?
Sure, I can start us off. Good morning, good afternoon, I think at this point for everybody. My name is Rasha, and I'm from Toronto, Canada, but I've moved around quite a bit in the past 15 years. So in 2008, I actually moved to Dubai with my partner, where I worked for a local autism center in the United Arab Emirates. I then ended up leaving Dubai and I moved to Minnesota, where I completed my master's degree under the advisement of Dr. John Rapp, who some of you may have heard of. I then left the United States, went back to Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates, where I started working at the New England Center for Children. Some of you may have heard of this center. It's based in Boston, and there's a sort of a sister campus in Abu Dhabi. And so I spent 7 years there providing education on behavioral programming to individuals on the spectrum. And during my time there, I was still involved in research and training, particularly new staff who joined our center. And then I realized that I was very passionate about research and pursuing teaching opportunities. So I decided to apply to a PhD program in Florida, where I had the privilege of working with Dr. Raymond Miltenberger. So I spent 4 years with him learning all about how to conduct safety skills training and assessment that we'll obviously be talking about today. And then this past summer, I started my new job as a tenure track assistant professor at the University of Manitoba. So I'm now back in Canada. Really excited to be back here. Not particularly my home city, but home country after being away for so long. So yeah, here I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Geller.
Yes, hello there. I'm Scott Geller. I'm the old timer. I've been at Virginia Tech for 53 years. In fact, I was once editor of JABA back in 1989, actually. And when I was editor of JABA, my concern was that we're limiting what we can do. In fact, this whole notion about getting beyond developmental disabilities is exactly what I wanted to do as editor of JABA. I wanted to get us beyond this narrow focus. And in fact, my research, I started with environmental stuff, and then I got into safety and started something called behavior-based safety. Maybe we'll talk about that today. It certainly relates to our topic. But I'm going to tell you something, and then I'll stop. I don't call myself a behavior analyst, folks. I mean, that's a limiting term. One of my frustrations, I might put this on the table. We have a lot of good science. We know how to improve behavior on a large scale, but it's not getting out there to the real world. It's not getting to the public. Our weakness is dissemination. And part of that is the term behavior analysis. I mean, is that like psychoanalysis? I mean, don't we do more than analyze behavior? So I suggest you call yourself a behavioral scientist, because the public appreciates science. But I'll stop there. I go on and on. Again, I'm frustrated that for years we've done the research. And now as I close out my career, I'm concerned about dissemination, getting it out to the public. But our language very often stifles that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't realize that I was on a different slide, but so I transitioned back. But thank you for sharing that point, Dr. Geller. Is there anything else that you want to share in relation to your career? Maybe how you got into this work?
You're asking me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, actually, I started out as a cognitive psychologist. I got my degree at SIU in the psychology department, SIU Carbondale. But of course, in that psychology department, they did not respect behavior analysis. I mean, that was done in another department. In fact, I learned behavior analysis from Ted Ione and Nate Azarin back at Anna State Hospital near Carbondale. So that's where I realized, so I got my Ph.D. in cognitive psychology, and I was hired at Virginia Tech in 1969 as a cognitive psychologist. And indeed, I got my tenure with that research, but it hit me that, hey, man, I want to make a difference. I want to improve human welfare. I want to do something that will improve quality of life for people. And I wasn't seeing that in cognitive psychology. So that got me into applied behavioral science, applying our principles to influence behavior to improve human welfare. And today, by the way, today I'm calling it humanistic behaviorism. Maybe that's a new term for some of you, but that back in the 70s, that was introduced as, in fact, B.F. Skinner said, humanism is a way to make behaviorism more effective. Actually, he said it the other way. He said behaviorism is the way to make humanism more effective. And I'm claiming that behaviorists need to be humanists. We need to practice empathy. We need to learn where the other person is coming from before we establish an intervention. Anyway, so again, I am convinced that we have the science that can improve the world, improve our culture. Today, we are so self-serving into ourselves. We need to be more interdependent. And indeed, we have the tools to help make that happen.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll pivot to our next question, which is, I guess, how would you define maybe public safety, or what, I guess, what areas could we expect to see within public safety? Essentially giving us kind of a definition or description, right, of public safety. Dr. Geller, would you like to start us off?
Well, my early work was how do we increase safety belt use? So indeed, public safety for me is rather narrow. If you're talking, it's transportation safety. But let me quickly say, in 1979, we started something called behavior-based safety in organizations. And if students out there are looking for a lucrative job, it's in organizations. It's using behavior-based safety or behavioral science to keep people safe. I have actually I'm writing the 3rd edition of the book. I wrote a book in 1994 called The Handbook, the Handbook of, the Psychology of Safety Handbook. And then another version was Working Safe. I'm now working on the 3rd edition of that book, and it's called Actively Caring for Safety. I believe in the word actively caring, by the way. Active is behavior, and caring is humanism. And now I'm back to humanistic behaviorism. But again, my point is, I have seen people make a fortune going into industry and applying behavior-based safety or behavioral science in the way that we defined it back in 1979. By the way, it's worldwide. The term behavior-based safety is a worldwide concept, but some organizations do not do it correctly. But behavior analysts, I should say behavior scientists, know how to do it correctly.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Baruni, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so I don't really think I need to define public safety sort of in the general sense. We know it's the prevention and protection from certain situations that are dangerous or may lead to death or injury. I think I like to talk about specifically safety in within the focus of my research in the past few years. And my research has focused on teaching children very specific safety responses, but that is the safety threats that we've been focusing on are really those that children don't have regular opportunities to practice. So I'm not saying that they're not important. They're important, right? Skills such as wearing a helmet or wearing a seatbelt or crossing a street, pedestrian safety. Those are things that are very important that children encounter, individuals encounter on a daily basis. But the key here is that they have opportunities to practice on a daily basis. So I've been more interested in those safety threats that occur less frequently that children don't have the opportunity to practice. Safety threats such as firearm safety, poison prevention, abduction, sexual violence, harassment. And that's even more relevant today in an online platform. You have, I'll get to that in a bit, but you have children who spend so much time online and don't necessarily have the skills to respond safely to potential lures. And so these safety threats don't occur frequently. And so children don't have opportunities to practice, but we still need to have the skills to teach them, or I guess the tools to teach them how to stay safe in these situations. And so the goal is to teach children, one, first, how to identify the safety threat, right? So you first have to discriminate and then move away from it. You then have to either not touch it in this, if it's a like a firearm or a medication bottle, don't touch it, or don't engage in social safety threats. So in the case of a potential lure, an online situation, or an abduction lure, for example. So not engaging, right? Not talking, not picking it up, not touching it. And then the important piece is to then report the safety threat, because if you report it, and then an adult is more likely to be able to either remove the safety threat or report the incident to authorities. So those are the 3 safety responses that we've been focused on in our research when we train and assess safety skills.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. All very interesting. I think you make a great point of, if there's an opportunity, right, to practice the skill, then the skill, right, can't emerge or probably won't, maintain across time.
Right. And a lot of the time, sorry, if I could just add, a lot of the times it's not proactive. It's very reactive, right? You have a child who starts playing with matches. Oh no, now we need to teach safety skills. So it really, the prevention piece is important to teach children a variety of safety threats, or how to respond to a variety of safety threats, rather than it always being reactive, right? Something terrible happens and now we're going to go in and teach it. Yeah,
that is a really good point. Yeah. So our next question, excuse me, reads, within this, I guess we can call it maybe a subspecialty, what populations do you typically work with, and or what settings do you typically work in? Dr. Baruni, would you like to start us off there?
Sure. So my work has been primarily with younger children, and specifically because of my background and training, with individuals with developmental disabilities. But more recently, I've been really interested in training clinicians, so BCBAs, BCABAs, who work in very specific, I guess, clinical environments. Because I was a BCBA myself and a clinician for many years, working with individuals on the spectrum, I am really interested in, again, it's more of the proactive approach, right, to teaching. A lot of times, because of our very specific training as behavior analysts, or behavior scientists, as we should probably be calling it, but we're trained to teach specific skills, whether it's because, important skills because of certain deficits, because of needs of the school, because of, caregivers, their priorities, but we often forget about safety skills, again, until something happens, and then we're like, oh my gosh, I need to do something about it. And so in our training, behavior analysts aren't really taught how to teach and assess. So that's kind of the population that I've been more interested in now, is training staff how to do this work, how to make this a priority, how to embed safety skills training within their individualized education plans, within their behavioral programming, so that they take a proactive approach. And what's interesting is that in a survey study that I published with Dr. Melnberger, who's dedicated his career to safety skills training and assessment, we found that, so it's a survey study that was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice. I did provide the article, but we found that 42% of those clinicians who we surveyed said that they use evidence-based practices for teaching safety skills. But our study highlighted a gap in training of these clinicians as it relates to safety skills trainings, because that's not a large number of behavior analysts or clinicians who are implementing evidence-based practices. And what are those evidence-based practices? It's using active learning approaches, right? Not this traditional sit at a table, look at a bunch of pictures, tell me which one is unsafe, and then tell me what you would do about it, but more active training, right? We're going to set up a situation, we're going to have you practice it, and then we're going to give you feedback on how you do, and then we're going to set up a real situation where you find the safety threat, and then we're going to assess what you do. So that's evidence-based practice for teaching safety skills. And so one of the top, I guess, barriers or reasons why behavior analysts in our survey study, they reported that they did not use evidence-based practices for teaching safety skills, and that was a lack of expertise. And so this really highlights the need for teaching people who work in those settings, who work with those individuals, who work with children, teaching them how to engage in those safety responses given specific contexts. And so if I could just add, that survey study then informed one of my more recent studies where I then developed a computerized training program for practitioners to kind of go through the steps of how to conduct training, and then more importantly, how to assess the effects of your training.
Okay, sounds very interesting. Yeah, that's certainly, you know, where we're pivoting right towards is more technological kind of based approaches. So
which gets at accessibility, right? Which gets
right.
at us disseminating our work and not just a few, group of people conducting this work, but having more of us conduct this type of work.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yes. Thank you. Dr. Geller, would you like to share about what populations maybe you have worked with or what settings you work in your line of work?
I've worked in all kinds of settings. And so what I like to do is I love the way we just heard about, you got to be proactive. So let me teach you an acronym, a simple acronym that puts it all together. And if you learn and practice what these words mean, you can do very well in this area called behavior-based safety. When I say behavior-based safety, I mean practicing behavioral science proactively to prevent injuries. So check it out. The acronym is COACH. We need to coach each other. So what do the letters of COACH mean? The first letter is a C. It means care. Know that I care, and you'll care what I know. So you start out with, again, I'm being empathic again, I'm being humanistic. I'm caring for you, and I care so much. The next letter of COACH, I'm going to observe you. I'm going to observe your behavior, and I'm going to note what is safe and what is not safe. I don't say not at risk. What is at risk? And while I'm observing you, the next letter of COACH, A, I'm analyzing. I'm analyzing the situation. I'm analyzing the consequences that perhaps are influencing at-risk behavior, or consequences that need to be added to promote safe behavior. And the next letter of COACH, I'm sure you guess what it is. It's another C, right? Communicate. I'm going to communicate feedback. I'm going to give you supportive feedback, and I'm going to give you corrective feedback. And by the way, behavior analysts, if that's what you call yourselves, or behavior scientists, know how to give feedback. That's one of the most powerful tools that we have in behavioral science. And we need, of course, give more supportive feedback than corrective feedback. And by the way, throw out the word criticism. That's constructive criticism. That's an oxymoron. That's wrong. It's supportive feedback and it's corrective feedback. It's not so easy, however, to give corrective feedback. How do you give corrective feedback? You say, that's wrong. That's no good. We know. Now we get humanistic. We ask more questions. Why did you do it that way? Is there a safer way to do that behavior? Have you learned a more safe way? Bottom line is corrective feedback. And that's the communication piece. And if you do it well, you know what the H means? Help. I care, I observe, I analyze, I communicate, and I help. And I got to give you one more quick story. The people who practice behavior-based safety worldwide, they leave out that second C. They go for a quick fix. They observe and they put the data on a computer, and then they post the data for feedback as a group. Now that's better than nothing, but they don't know how to give corrective and supportive feedback. That's the missing link that people educated and trained in behavior analysis know how to do.
Mhm. Thank you for that acronym. I had never heard of it, and maybe others haven't heard of it either. So thank you for sharing that. Looking at the time, we'll go to our next question, which is what training or preparation would you say is needed to work in this subspecialty? Dr. Geller, would you like to start us off there?
Well, I really think your training and education in behavior analysis, as you would call it, is certainly very relevant. But I want to say, I mean, I've written 50 books, by the way. So I've written 9 books in the field of behavior-based safety, only to say that the resources are out there for applying applied behavioral science for safety. But again, it's not typically taught in a university class, unless you could take OBM, organizational behavior management, clearly has many of the tools. But if you're talking about actually working in industry, doing the COACH acronym that I shared with you, developing teams. I mean, imagine, let me just say this quickly. The way safety is done in industry, it's top down. OSHA rules and regulations, you follow the rules. And the reason behavior-based safety became so popular is because we turned that upside down. We had the workers define what is safe and what is at risk. Not OSHA, not the safety department, but the workers themselves. They know what's not safe. They know where the risky behavior is happening. So they define a behavioral checklist. And then they observe each other and give feedback. And notice, to us, that's of course, but in the safety world, that is totally contrary to the way it's been done for many years.
Thank you. Dr. Baruni?
Yeah, so I think you'd mentioned that there are some undergraduate students here, correct? And this is, I believe,
Geared towards students.
Geared towards students. So, so one of the most important things I consider, if you are an undergraduate student who is interested in getting more training in a particular subspecialty. Now, I won't go on about graduate programs within behavior analysis, right? That's a whole separate thing. But a lot of the times, because they have to follow the ASD task list, and there's very specific, items, right, that have to be taught. But one of the things that isn't really focused on within graduate training is, and Dr. Geller talked a little bit about this, but I use a different acronym, that's behavioral skills training, right, which is instructions, modeling, right? Those are the sort of the antecedent part. If we think about behavior scientists thinking about our 3-term contingency, the actual safety behavior, and then the consequences, right? The feedback, like Dr. Geller had just talked about, providing the feedback for those specific responses. So that's evidence-based teaching, uses behavioral skills training. And a lot of times in graduate training programs, we don't learn a whole lot about how to implement behavioral skills training, and specifically with safety skills, that you're not going to get that training. And so back to what I was going to say, considerations for if you're an undergrad student is find a mentor, find an advisor, find a program that has mentors, researchers who are focused in on this particular subspecialty, who do the research in this area, and reach out to them. Find those programs that will incorporate more of safety skills training, use it active learning approaches to safety skills training, and not informational programs, because there are a ton of informational programs, in our typical school settings. That's how children are taught, right? That's how stranger danger, that's how they're firearm safety, they're taught using informational programs, but we know that those are not effective. We've got research that has looked at some of those commercially available programs for teaching safety skills, but we know they're not effective, and we know that active approaches such as behavioral skills training, and there are others that incorporate the rehearsal component, the feedback component, which is the consequence to your behavior, right? So then you can change how you performed the skill in that particular context. So learning all of this is going to be really important to preparing for entering a subspecialty such as this one. And it all starts with, for undergrads, it all starts with, the advisor, the mentor, the program that you select to pursue your higher education.
Mm-hmm.
I know I went off topic a little bit, sorry, but yeah, I tried to bring it back.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Quickly, a tool that you all have as undergraduates and graduate students that I never had is you have Google Scholar. You can Google the name of a professor and you can see what their research is all about. And you can really determine whether, as Dr. Baruni said, you can determine whether they could offer you the kind of training that you're looking for. Again, boy, learn how to give feedback, corrective feedback. That'll give you a really heads up in it. And again, it is behavioral skills training.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I would also add, like Dr. Geller said, yeah, Google, right? Google those researchers, but be sure to look at recent research, right? Don't pull up something from, 1990 and then look up recent literature, current researchers, and reach out to those, because those, they're the ones that are going to be in the graduate training programs if they're operating, in a researcher capacity and conducting research at a university and graduate training program. So you want to look up recent research and then reach out to those individuals to see if, if they're taking on students, ask them about their, current, what their current students are doing in those research labs, and sort of where they plan on taking their research with students. So those are all things that you should definitely look at as an undergrad when you're looking at grad programs.
Okay. All right, thank you. Our next question is if there are any prominent special interest groups or professional organizations for the subspecialty. I think Dr. Baruni, do you have any information to share?
I feel like Dr. Geller might have more than I would. Within behavior analysis, it's interesting because Dr. Geller started out by saying, that we have a lot of limitations. The answer is, to my knowledge, no. Within behavior analysis, that is. I'm not aware of any special interest groups. I was actually a little surprised when I started looking into this because I was on ABAI's website looking up all their SIGs, and I'm like, how come there's no safety skills or safety skills training SIG? But if anyone's interested in getting one started, please reach out. I feel like Dr. Geller will have more to say about this.
Well, only that when I started out, you're right. There's not within our silo, but I mean, there's the National Safety Council and there's the American Society of Safety Professionals. And by the way, I started going to those meetings way in the 70s. And indeed, I've given keynote addresses at those, many keynote addresses. But in the beginning, I just went to listen. And boy, I sat on my hands because I wanted to scream with what they were teaching at these conferences, way off what we believe and way off what we know now is wrong. And they still do it wrong. The pop psychology out there and the top-down rule-governed stuff we know is wrong. And the bottom line is, go to these professional meetings and learn what their perspective, again, we're being humanistic, find out where they're coming from. And then, as I did, I give a presentation that would demonstrate evidence-based and also common sense that there's a better approach, that behavioral scientists know a better approach than this top-down, rule-governed, government-determined approach to safety. So the bottom line is, get humanistic, find out where they're coming from, then you sneak in. Again, I've been giving keynote addresses all over the place, but it started, I had to first learn. I heard to first learn, and again, I found out how weak and how incompetent the field is out there in the real world. Back to my frustration. We know so much more, but we're not getting it out there to the real world. So subspecialty, we don't need a subspecialty in psychology or in behavior analysis. We need to, there are subspecialties out there. We need to attack those specialties with our expertise.
Thank you. Our next question is, what mentorship or supervised field work or employment opportunities do you know of are available within this subspecialty? So, within the area of maybe public safety. Dr. Geller, any insights there?
I only know through universities. Like, for example, I have a Center for Applied Behavior Systems at Virginia Tech. And since 1987, we've been running students through our center, about 50 every semester, but that's all I know about. I mean, again, it's a weakness. It's a weakness, but maybe Dr. Baruni knows something more that I don't know about that, but there's not much out there in terms of, you have to create it. We have to create it ourselves. We have to create a mentorship opportunity for students. And we've been kind of doing it.
Okay.
At a small scale, though.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Baruni, any
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because it is difficult getting, as a student starting out in this field, it's difficult getting into a subspecialty that doesn't have such a wide area of practice, where there are many experts within the area. So although it's difficult, I think it's also something that's very exciting about an area that is not as common. And like Dr. Geller was saying, absolutely, it's all about, for those of us who are doing this work, disseminating, getting out there, getting our work out there. But again, just to bring it back to talking to students and those who are in supervised field work, who are pursuing their BCBAs or BCABAs. So I think it's important to make it known to your supervisor that you have an interest in the area, and always start with the literature, right? You have to, I can't emphasize the importance of becoming familiar with the current and relevant research in this area. So again, like Dr. Geller was saying, it's all, from what I know, it's mostly concentrated in university, graduate training programs. And then based on what the content that is being taught in these graduate training programs, and then these individuals go out and start practicing in different contexts. But it all starts there with the students in our programs. Another thing that's important to consider is, if you have a supervisor, you are doing your supervised fieldwork hours for certification, consider sort of how your supervisor, how good are they at translating research into practice? Because that's where we're going to learn, for example, you go into the literature, you want to start a safety skills training program, you're going to find within applied behavior analysis that behavioral skills training is what has a lot of the evidence and support for teaching children specific safety skills. And so how are you going to learn about that? By going into the literature, by knowing how to take that information and then translating it into practice. And if your supervisor doesn't have that experience in conducting safety skills training and assessing, because again, we're kind of talking about training, I can't emphasize how important it is to assess, right? So it's not just good enough to train the skills. Can they then do it in the environments that you are expecting for that behavior, right? You're expecting for specific behaviors to be for them to engage in these specific behaviors in specific environments. Well, we need to assess in those environments, right? It's not just let's train and then, well, hopefully they hopefully if they find a real firearm at home, they don't touch it, run away and tell an adult. Well, we have to set it up so that they don't touch it and they go and tell an adult. We set it up in our training, and then we've got to assess. So all of that, again, is part of the evidence-based practices that I've been talking about. But if your supervisor doesn't have that experience, then you might want to seek out a different supervisor who has. And then lastly, students shouldn't hesitate to contact authors of the specific papers that they find. So contact authors, ask them questions, ask them details about their procedures, so that you can then, with your supervisor, learn about how to do that.
Can I follow up, please? Wonderful point to make. And I need to add, yes, I have written behavior skills training for parents, one book for parents, another book for police officers, another book for college students, and another book for safety directors. The point is, all those books you can see there, read them and get a review by going my name, Geller, and these initials, AC, the number 4P.com. AC4P means actively caring for people. We started a movement several years ago after our shooting tragedy at Virginia Tech, and these books were written to promote the application of behavioral science, behavior skills training for different areas. As Dr. Baruni said, there are different ways of applying the basic principles, but in different places. So, and there's those books there's brief reviews on that website about each of those books, and so you can see what fits your interest.
Thank you for letting us know about that. I think Dr. Williams Awodeha put a link to the website in the chat for those who are interested. Our second to last question is, and we can start with you, Dr. Geller, is where do you see or maybe hope to see public safety focusing on within behavior science?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Where do you see or hope? I mean, obviously, I hope more people get involved in applying behavior skills training, giving feedback. The COACH acronym that I mentioned earlier, boy, imagine more people doing that in a positive way. We would have a safer environment, a happier environment. By the way, what point? Years ago, when I started public safety with promoting safety belt use, I came up with another acronym, DO IT. Thank you, Nike. Just do it. D, define a behavior that you want to increase in frequency, like safety belt use. And then O, you know what O is, observe it. And then the I is intervene, to influence that behavior. And the T of do it is to test. So again, we're back to the principles of behavior analysis, or as I would say, behavioral science is defining the behavior, noting what's influencing that behavior, and then test to see if your intervention works.
All right, thank you. Dr. Baruni, any maybe other behaviors or areas or settings, populations that you hope to see maybe public safety focusing on, or is maybe one of those areas that you're currently focusing on?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about the couple of areas that I'm really hoping to take my research to. So like I said at the beginning, I'm really passionate, like Dr. Geller had mentioned too, I'm really passionate about the accessibility of safety skills training. Again, I'm talking about very specific, right? We talked about how public safety can be very broad and general with so many areas within that. So when I say safety skills training, I'm talking about those safety skills that are that individuals don't get regular practice with, right? That occur infrequently, are dangerous, potentially deadly. And so those are the safety skills that I'm focused on. So I'm really passionate about the accessibility of training, getting it out there to more people. And again, a lot of what's out there is informational approaches, and particularly in school settings and in, when we're talking about training children in typical, regular school settings and in, specialized schools, it's a lot of informational approaches. People think that, that works. Let me just put on a video, here's some coloring books, here's some instructional materials, and there's no active responding, there's no feedback. That's really problematic. And then we expect that if a child finds a firearm, that they're just going to know what to do because they watched some videos and had some kind of coloring material. It's not going to work. So disseminating this information and making it more accessible is something that I'm really interested in. And like I had mentioned more recently, I developed an interactive computerized training program, because what we know about technology is that we can disseminate information, it becomes more readily available. And so we found that interactive computerized training, or ICT as it's called in the literature, is a robust way to teach, particularly the population that I was focused on is behavior analysts, so BCBAs. And so how can we disseminate this work so that more people have access to this type of training? One of the things that BCBAs tell me, well, I didn't get this graduate, I didn't get this training. I don't know how to do behavioral skills training. I don't know how to assess. I don't know how to do this stuff in the natural environment. And we know, and a lot of BCBAs can tell you the 4 components of behavioral skills training, but then the research that I was doing showed that, but when you actually test them, they don't know how to do it. And then they don't know how to follow it up with an assessment, which is, again, one of the most important things about training, is then you have to evaluate the effects of your training. How do you do that in a naturalistic assessment? Otherwise, how would you know if they can do the skills? The other area that I'm really interested in is evaluating specifically behavioral skills training for online safety. So we know a lot of children spend so many hours playing online games, on social media platforms, talking to friends online. It's an entirely different world. And we recently published a study where we evaluated remote behavioral skills training in a particular online game, where we had individuals present lures in this online game platform. And then we first assess what the children did, right? When they were presented with lures such as, what's your name? Where do you live? What's your Instagram name? Things, personal information, because that's what we know about the literature, right? Is that's how it starts. That's how the grooming process starts, right? In these online situations. So we taught 2 children how to engage in safe behaviors when presented with a lure. So not responding to the lure, exiting the game, and going to tell a parent about it. And so I'd like to continue investigating training programs for these safety skills in online platforms. And I think it's, we're right now, and there are other groups doing this work too, where they're looking at gaming online. But to my knowledge, no one's really looked at, in applied behavior analysis, no one's looked at social media, right? So, lures in the form of pictures. We just haven't looked at that. And I think, haven't given it much thought right now, but creating the assessments for those types of responses, I think would be challenging, but still doable.
Right. Thank you. And so this brings us to our last question, which reads, what advice do you have for students who are interested in pursuing a career or education in this subspecialty? Dr. Baruni, your thoughts on your advice for students?
Yeah, so I think I'd mentioned the same things that I talked about. If you're an undergrad student who's interested in pursuing this line of work, you obviously want to look at the graduate program, right? What courses do they offer? What trainings do they offer? Who are the faculty that are at these programs, and what kind of research are they doing? So you really, you don't want to just pick a graduate program because you're interested, you know, just like, oh, this one seems interesting, or this one's in the city that I kind of want to live in. You really want to look at what are the courses, who are the faculty, what research are they doing, and you could even ask about this line of work. Is there any training opportunities within these graduate programs? And if, you know, I know we've got some individuals here who maybe are not students and are clinicians. I think at the start, I think you're saying that maybe some of them are clinicians. There are 2 peer-reviewed papers that were written for behavior analysts who want to expand their scope of competence, and I can send them to you, but one's by LeBlanc and colleagues in 2012, and one's by Broadhead and colleagues 2018. And in both of these articles, they provide guidelines and suggestions for those interested in learning different skills than they would have learned in their academic or graduate training. So I think those are relevant for clinicians, but also I think students can take a look at these articles and review those guidelines, because it is about how to, you know, I know Dr. Geller had mentioned this early on, this notion of beyond, right? You know, but at the end of the day, it's our science. But somehow some of us are in this, you know, I don't want to offend anybody, but we're practicing within a very limited scope. And so these articles help those of us who are interested in maybe getting into other, you know, a different scope of practice or competence. Not undermining the work that we've done in very specific areas within ABA.
Thank you. Dr. Geller, any advice for students interested in this area?
Well, again, I'm not trying to sell books, but I did mention that those books are available. You could just look them on the internet and see. But by the way, if you're an undergraduate, you don't have to wait to go to graduate school. You could Google your current faculty at your university or college and have a conversation with faculty who connect with behavioral science. I mean, I work with 50 undergraduates, and I tell them, by the way, I've learned the hard way, don't, in terms of a specialty, go with the flow. What feels right for you, you know? And again, but you have to read about that specialty. And my challenge, and I've co-authored 2 novels to try to get people interested in behavioral science and solving real world problems. Again, it's the issue of dissemination. And I'm grateful that we had this conversation, because maybe it'll just influence a few of you to check out some of these opportunities. I'll say it one more time. I started a company called Safety Performance Solutions. Among my graduate students, they became millionaires. They made more money than I, because I stayed with the university, but they went out in industry and trained and taught behavior-based safety, which I said is worldwide. So my point is it is about marketing. And my weakness as an academic is marketing. The consultants know how to market, and they go over to these. And when I went to these conferences, I'd hear these consultants seemingly knowing very little, but getting a lot of attention because they know how to deliver, but the content is not very good, very evidence-based. So the bottom line is, go to some of those conferences and do better than I did. You know, it is about marketing and getting the word out. But the field is wide open, folks. The real world needs behavioral science to improve quality of life, particularly in the field of safety. Companies lose major money because they don't get employees doing the right. You know why? You all know why. At-risk behavior is rewarded. It's reinforced. The intrinsic consequences, rewarding consequences, are get the job done fast, be comfortable, and so forth. And so safety is fighting human nature. But behavior analysts, behavior science, you know how to do that. We know how to manipulate the environment to get that the inconvenient behavior happening. So the fact that you know how to do that better than anybody else, go out there and do it. But go to some of these conferences, the safety conferences, just to listen in. like I did many years ago. And I think it will motivate you to say, yeah, I can do better than they.
Mhm. Thank you very much. So we do have some time for any questions, from the audience. You're welcome to use the chat if you do have a question, or to unmute for your questions. So feel free, to ask away. In the meantime, we do have Dr. Williams Awodeha already put this in the chat, I think 3 links ago, a link to our resources page. So it contains the articles that Dr. Baruni was mentioning, and we're also going to be updating it. It'll include the link to Dr. Geller's website. So that's accessible to, to everyone to look at. And I think we're going to probably add some more things after our live panel today. And we also have our post-test. So if you completed a pre-test, we just please ask that you complete the post-test, just to, gauge kind of what you learned following our panel today. And finally, so we're at the kind of tail end of our ABA Beyond ASD series. And so our last topic will be next month. And that topic, or the panel, will focus on crime, delinquency, and forensics within behavior analysis or behavior science. That'll be on October 6th. And if you follow us on social media, this is our information. Sometime next week, we should release information about how to register for that last panel, who our panelists will be, kind of all that information. And so we're essentially at time, and I just want to, on behalf of Dr. Williams Awodeha and Dr. Shawler, to extend our gratitude to our wonderful panelists, Dr. Baruni, Dr. Geller. We have their email addresses here on screen. And just thank you both so much for sharing, certainly an area that I don't know much about, and I'm sure, right, others are interested in learning more about. So thank you, both of you, for your time and your expertise, your knowledge. And I think that concludes our time today. So I wish you all a good, if you're watching live or the recording, right, a good rest of your day. And thank you for joining us.